Well, hello everybody. Good morning. I first want to say I'm sorry that we're meeting under these circumstances. I was asked a few days ago if I'd come up and share some of my own personal experiences, but mostly I think to address specific questions that will come up from each of you in your own experience, because everyone's experience is going to be a little different. So we have a mix of folks who have lost everything in their home, some who are near the burn scars, others who are concerned want to see what they can do. I think everyone would like to get a better grasp on how it's going to play out going forward. So that's some of the areas that we'll focus on. After my house burned down, I spent 3 weeks fighting those fires. We lived at a beach. I bought the last tent at the Walmart, took my family out there. When I finally got back, I found my donkey. I had let the gate open as we fled, and he survived, but he burned on the side. He had a little scar. He's a tough old guy, though, Steve the donkey. He's still there. He's still on that property. I went on and put together crews and got a contract under the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. These are the same guys that are going to come in and clean up the Eaton fire. So I can go into great detail on that. I was moving 1,000 tons a day of fire debris, and that was the largest amount of any of the crews out there. Because we were fire victims ourselves, I hired mostly fire victims. We were given the difficult jobs, places where people had perished, sensitive areas, et cetera. I went on to build over 50 homes once we got into that process, et cetera, et cetera. In the end, I did not rebuild. I ended up in a lawsuit with the utility company, and I think all of you are going to end up in a lawsuit with a utility company. I only got the last check a month ago. 7 years later, I finally got my last check. Has everybody got a stable place to live? Does anybody not have a stable place to live? We ended up living in 3 different places in the first year. We tried transferring our information from one data set from FEMA to the county to the city records back and forth. And even today, the city of Santa Rosa still sends mail to the very first address where we stayed at. If you don't have a P.O. box, or if you're not using somebody, a parent's or a neighbor's, or, an old neighbor's address, you really should do that. Over the next year or two, most likely you will be moving numerous times, and trying to get all your information sent to one spot is really important. Has everyone set up with FEMA? Has everyone called in and talked to them, filled out the forms and everything? Okay. You guys are at the point now, if you're stable and you have a place to live, and you're getting your mail or your information sent long term, you're going to start looking at the insurance aspect of this and the cleanup aspect of this. So maybe, a couple nodding heads, maybe that's where we should kind of focus. So the cleanup process, okay. You are fortunate that you in Eaton have the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers overseeing your project. They are the best. They know what they're doing, and they are serious people, and they are going to come in and they are going to do a very good job. They will contract out to administrative companies. These administrative companies are usually from the southeast of the United States where there are hurricanes. That is the natural disaster relief company headquarters area because of hurricanes, et cetera. Numerous companies will come in. Usually 2 or 3. There's a California company as well, EEC they may use out of the Bay Area. And those companies will contract out with local contractors. This, believe it or not, will be a very well coordinated project. There are strict standards in place. There will be a lot of oversight, and you should feel very comfortable opting in and going with the government cleanup. Believe it or not, you will see an efficient government response. I know.
Is that the FEMA opt-in to do it?
Yes, FEMA will be the agency directing the opt-in or opt-out because they're the first on site. But FEMA won't be running it. They will hand off, they're in the process of handing off now that aspect of it to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the Eaton fire. For Palisades, I have not yet seen whether it's going to be the Army Corps of Engineers or the California Office of Emergency Services, Cal OES. Cal OES cleaned up the Paradise fire. They cleaned up the Woolsey fire and others, but they had bureaucratic issues. U.S. Army Corps cleaned up Katrina and is in North Carolina and has a lot of experience with these big things. And so they're going to come in on the Eaton side at least. We'll see how it plays out with Palisades. But whether it's Cal OES or U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, both have experience, both are very good. They are going to come in, the government will pay for everything. Your properties will be cleaned exceptionally well. Then those agencies will go after your insurance companies, and they will then extract what they can from your insurance companies for the claim for cleanup underneath your policy without you having to worry about it. And they can get whatever they get from the insurance policies. It is, in most cases, the best way to go. Any question? Yeah.
Before you were saying making sure everyone had contacted FEMA, I have one client, she's in a similar situation where her house is still standing, but it's the only one. And FEMA said they can't give assistance until the insurance company denies everything.
We can go into it, and there's a couple other people have this too. Is there any question about what I was saying so far? But we'll jump right into that. Perfect.
When you say cleanup, I've heard this thing where they're going in right now to clean up like the toxic paints, batteries, all that. That's just phase one, right?
So phase one, they will send out specialized crews who are trained to work in areas with asbestos or hazardous materials. As a firefighter, one of my certifications was hazmat first responder. I'm a hazmat first responder. I know the subject well. They're going to look for propane tanks. They're going to look for evidence of asbestos. We had a dentist in our area who had collected mercury over the years, and the mercury had vaporized in his garage. That became a hazmat. So they will identify these things. Ammo is another thing that they'll be looking for. You can imagine how many rounds there are out there. Most rounds don't go off in these fires. So there are many different things that they'll be looking for. And they will identify this. Phase one, it'll go pretty quick, although there's a lot of homes, but it'll go pretty quick in a matter of weeks. They will make up a list and pull those aside that are sensitive parcels, but the vast majority of people won't be that. It's not your propane tank from your barbecue in the backyard, although they will be sending in teams to pick these up. They will send in teams to pick up the Teslas and lithium batteries, et cetera, and I'll get right to you. So they are looking for these things. It goes pretty quick, but you know, the Freon in your refrigerator or other things, it's not that level of stuff. It's a higher level of materials. So that phase one will go. It's in process right now, and it'll be done in the next 2-3 weeks. Once that's done, they will pretty quickly roll out the cleanup phase.
So that phase one, does that happen for all the properties?
That happens for all properties. All properties. Mm-hmm. All properties will go ahead and get looked at, and it's like I mentioned, the dentist's out, right? I mean, if you brought in a private contractor, so if you do not decide to opt in, if your house did not burn down, and I am going to get to you, but if your house didn't burn down, if it's smoke damaged, you do have a degree of damage there, right? There is heat damage, there is smoke damage, there is toxic material potentially on source, most likely. And the degree of that is going to influence what your response is. You do have the option of, if you are not red tagged, to bring in a private cleanup and go forward. If your house is standing and in good shape and you're far enough away and your utilities are working or working enough, you may want to consider bringing in a private cleanup crew. And they can deal with your insurance companies. Make sure you don't sign anything until the insurance company agrees. Everyone's on board on the same idea. You have a quote. Don't just do it open-ended. You have a quote in place. Your insurance company agrees to that. Then you may go forward. However, even if you clean up a smoke-damaged house, you may not have drinkable, potable water for a while, for quite a while. Could be a year or more. And you may have other issues as well. Also, just because your house looks fairly smoke free, you may have toxic soil, and you probably do. The toxins in the soils are a huge problem for all of these properties, and it's one of the bigger parts of the cleanup. after the homes are cleaned up, we then scrape about 6 inches off of the soils, send it out. There's all kinds of testing that go with it. We don't need to get lost in the woods. But on the side of the folks who didn't lose their home, it really is a case by case. If you're the house standing in the middle of all the burned out areas, yeah, you probably want to go back and revisit that and see if you can get in a FEMA program. If you're on the edge of a burn scar and the utilities happen to come from behind you where it's good and you're going to have water and sanitation, that's a different calculation. That is a home that could be habitable in a fairly short period of time. In an issue we have now where there's going to be, there already is a huge shortage of places to live and places to stay, et cetera, it's a different calculation. And it probably is worth going after a private cleanup sooner rather than later.
I have a couple of people asking how, like while they're doing the cleanup or until everything is done, how far away from that epicenter would you recommend outdoor masking for vulnerable groups like children or people with lung issues, et cetera?
So, as a person, as a guy, I grew up wrenching on cars and motorcycles. I own motorcycles, I ride motorcycles, and I get oil on my hands, and I was a little skeptical about toxicity. However, once I started on this cleanup, and once I met the guys monitoring the air, and once my crews started getting their blood tested, I changed my tune real quick. It is more toxic than people realize. There is an entire process that needs to be followed before you really go in and dig around in the ashes. You need to have a Tyvek suit all the way on. You need it taped at the bottom. You need neoprene gloves on, and then leather gloves over that if you're going to put your hands in that soil. There's sharp edges in there. There's nails, there's glasses, all kinds of things. You need to have an N95 mask over. And as you enter and exit your place, you need a tub of water that you step into and step out of. That is the legal protocol for anyone entering into a fire burned area. And that's important to follow. If you have kids or you have respiratory issues or you have older folks, you want to stay away from that area. And you want to stay away until it's cleaned up. That means 6 months to a year. And that's an important distinction. You may have a partially burned house, and you may have a person asked me the other day, the kid's baseball glove was in there. Can they go get it? And I said, you can get a baseball bat if it didn't burn, and you can clean it off, but don't let your kid touch it. But a mitt with all the porosity on it? No, you can't use that. You have to throw that away because the toxins really are that bad. The issue with the toxins needs to be taken seriously. There is a natural inclination to be brave and to go in and to set aside caution at this time, and that is a big mistake. We had long-term issues with some of the people in our fire because they weren't taking it seriously. They were going in.
And how many miles away from like that epicenter would you say?
It's really hard to say because of the way the wind blows. What was happening that day of the fire? Did the wind blow? Did it get concentrated more in this area or over in that area? As a general rule of thumb, I'm going to go with hundreds of yards outside of the burn scar, up to a quarter mile. Past a quarter mile, after you've had a couple rains, you can walk around. But remember, there's going to be nasty stuff in the air every time the wind blows, and that's going to carry potentially miles. So given that, N95 masks or getting those people who are vulnerable permanently away, or let's say medium term away, is a smart thing to do, a very smart thing to do. You guys have been back to your place, you've gotten the sore throats already, you already feel what it's like. Some of you have touched that stuff, you've felt it a little bit, and you get a sense that, yeah, there's something here, but you also survived because you walked in, you walked out, and you're okay. Long term, the ramifications are really serious. The properties are older properties. Obviously, I think you all know this, have asbestos in there. A lot of the products that we put in our homes today, you probably heard this too, sofas and carpets and all these things are relatively safe until they burn, and they release all kinds of butane and all kinds of nasty stuff. And that stuff's all right there. So There's a process of procedure to follow to go into your properties. Please follow it. Make sure you follow it the best you can, and keep the vulnerable people away for the foreseeable, at least until it's cleaned up.
Yeah.
Who is regulating in these areas, landscapers who have their leaf blowers out, things like that? I mean, I'm still driving these neighborhoods because our kids' school is there and seeing things like this. So when you say, the U.S. Army Corps is here and running that, like, are they also regulatory? What should we expect in terms of things like that?
It's a great question. I was shocked at how many when I was doing the fire cleanup, so about a month from now, from where you guys are, in a month or so, there are going to be regulatory bodies from all over the places. Because it's such a large scale disaster that government agencies will be coming from all over the place. We had people that ran dams in Idaho, natural resources, Bureau of Natural Resources come out and help with monitoring. We had people from the military. We had people from all kinds of stages of government. Local governments from other counties will send in people simply to learn how the regulatory aspect of the response should function. And these are well-meaning people, but they don't have experience. So you're going to run into a hodgepodge of different agencies enforcing different aspects and people with different levels of experience. Some with none, they're there to watch and learn. Some have been through a bunch of these and they know exactly what they're doing. And you're going to find conflicting regulatory bodies. I had people come in and say you can't water everything down with a hose while you're working because it's going to run down the street. And then an hour or two later, people coming in and saying, you have to hose this down to keep all the stuff. My cleanup crews actually purchased a street sweeper with a water jet on it. And we had radios, and we would tell them which regulatory body was driving by. And I'd say, hold off on the water street sweeping right now because the guys who don't like water are coming by. Other times I'd say, hey, bring it up to this street because we're working there and they're coming to see if we have any dust in the air. So there's going to be conflicting and very frustrating aspects as different city, county, state, and federal agencies converge and attempt to kind of take this on. And it's a source of frustration because you'll get so much conflicting stuff. As for leaf blowers, that is up to your city. I would go to a city council meeting and I would say, I'd stand up, you get 3 minutes to talk, they're every 2 weeks, and I'd say, this is crazy. Why do we have leaf blowers going on when we have this toxic stuff in the air? It is, if you tried to go to the FEMA or the Army Corps of Engineers, there's no way they could get to that. But if you went to the city, they could easily put a ban on leaf blowing until we've had a few inches of rain and a bunch of fire cleanup. And it's going to take people like yourself standing up and correcting these things all the way through to get it to flow the way that it should. There'll be lots of examples like this. Trucks that carry this waste, at first, we just had a tarp over them. Pretty quickly, they started doing, they called it a burrito wrap. So we'd put down thick plastic that flowed over the truck, fill the truck. The plastic would then go over. It gets taped down the seam and tucked in the back, and then squirted with some water, and only then could they drive to the designated landfill. So it'll evolve quickly as people like yourselves point out things that of concern, and the agencies will respond. They will respond to the input, but they won't respond if there isn't the input. So I would encourage everybody to put in the input as you see fit with these kinds of things.
Thank you.
So for like our neighbors, the couple homes that survived were like a block away from the National Forest at the top. And we've been thinking about like when is the time, like when are enough of the properties around us clear, because it's blocks and blocks and blocks, to be able to like return, because I think insurance is going to try to push us back in. Like, would you suggest like waiting until all of the homes have been cleared by the Army Corps, or like what would you suggest around that?
So the Army Corps, to be clear, is an administrative body. The work will be done by private contractors. Those private contractors are given paperwork, legal paperwork, to clean up areas, and usually in small clusters of 3, 4, 6, 8 homes at a time, maybe one block, maybe not every house. And it was always very confusing to everyone involved as to why some areas got cleaned up, but then this area didn't a block away, and all the crews now move 2 miles or a mile over here, and then they come back a month later. It was chaotic. I never got a full answer on it. Some of it I do believe has to do with thoroughfares, and they want some areas cleaned up quicker, which made sense. So it's hard to say in your area if you'll get that area cleaned up all together, and if so, at what pace. Somebody will have the first street cleaned up, and someone will have the last street cleaned up. The cleanup will take at least 9 months. 9 months from when you see on TV that the first crew is cleaning up the first house, and that's going to be in just a few weeks. 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe 5, something in that neighborhood. Depends on the rain, depends on government. But then you've got about 9 months or so. So if your area happens to be one of the first that's cleaned up, and if your area is not getting a lot of breeze coming your way and winds prevailing in your direction, et cetera, I would go at that time. But if you're near the burn area where there's going to be all this work going on, near is a relative term, but if I was a block, 2 blocks away, I wouldn't, especially if you have kids or you're susceptible, you get bronchitis, that kind of thing. So it's going to be case to case, and without knowing the specifics of your area, it's hard to say. I know you need a place to live in as soon as possible, and you're going to have to kind of look at your scenario and get a feel for it, because each one's going to be different. The other thing is the mode of traffic going from your house going through a burn scar, or are you usually driving away from a burn scar? If your house is here and normal traffic to the stores, to the schools is away from the burn scar, then you probably should think about getting the process done quicker rather than later. But if you're at the edge of the neighborhood but it survived, but you've got to go all through that burn scar every day, then I would wait.
Do you know about cleanup if they designate like a particular few blocks to start with and kind of go out? Like, is there a way of kind of tracking where the cleanup is happening, like in that 9-month process?
So the cleanup will ramp up. They will hire numerous construction, emergency response and fire debris cleanup companies. Most of those will be very large companies who have done it before, who will run teams and crews, but it'll be a slow ramp up. Usually in the beginning, it will be 1 street, 2 streets, in a sector of a neighborhood at a time. And that'll go for a few weeks while the entire process ramps up. While the dump, where this is going, brings in a second and third scale to weigh the trucks, where the administrative people who do their legal paperwork ramp up and hire extra people so they can put it out, because they can't just go on a parcel. You have to have about 10 to 20 page document all written up and handed to the crew to clean it before they can go. Well, that is an administrative area. So there's a ramp up in many, many ways that goes on. So you'll see in 1 or 2 neighborhoods, you'll be frustrated that it's not in your neighborhood. There'll be political pressure then put on by the local mayors, by county folks as well, because constituents are frustrated. They're getting theirs cleaned up. How come we're not over here? And suddenly the mayor will say, well, and others, no offense to any one particular person, but there'll be political pressure to now get some work on this neighborhood, and you know what, this neighborhood, and a little bit on this neighborhood. In our fire, we had a neighborhood called Coffee Park, and those folks were hit really hard. I was in Coffee Park the night of the fire after my house burned down, and that's where I did a lot of the firefighting that I did. The area of Coffee Park as a neighborhood was more of a working class area. It was a convenient area for people to be organized and have a voice. And that was picked up by the media, and it became a recognized area. And that led to a lot of political pressure to get that particular neighborhood on its feet pretty quickly. And so the folks in Coffee Park, not dissing them at all, I know some of those people, I cleaned up some of those homes, but they did get it kind of cleaned up a little quicker and more cohesive than other neighborhoods did. So it's a funny is not the right word, but it's not as logical as you might think it'd be. There's inputs that go on, there's politics that go on, and there's pressure that goes on. There's main thoroughfares that really should be cleaned up quicker. There's infrastructure issues that go on. Some have cell phone towers that have been damaged, or underground water pipes. The butane can go underneath the water pipes, and now we've got pipes, we've got contaminated water, so that area needs to be cleaned up a little quicker. And it's a source of frustration, but it's not logical. But it is in little clusters, and you can kind of monitor that. If you're seeing your neighborhood or your particular block isn't getting any attention, you can bring it to people's attention. And the squeaky wheel does get a little bit grease in this situation.
For those of us that are definitely, well, using Army Corps probably, can you talk a little bit about the opting in and opting out for like foundation and trees and just all the other?
These are good, these are important questions. No one else is going to be answering this, and this is an important one. Foundations. You can save money if you can keep your foundation. And we ran into a lot of people who did not want their concrete foundations taken out from their homes because they knew their insurance was not going to be enough to repair, price per square foot, the entire rebuild. And everything they could save could potentially offset that deficit and help them get to where they needed to be. And at first, I felt the same way. But I very quickly came to understand that after 2020, the building codes changed radically in California. You will not be able to use the foundations of your houses. You will find contractors who will tell you otherwise. And they may convince folks. It's a marketing campaign. No offense to the contractors out there, but these games do go on. Our fire, a lot of people were susceptible early on. I wasn't sure one way or the other, but as I found out the process, and I realized, yeah, foundations after the year 2020 in California have to be a waffle pattern. If it's 2-story, it's got to be thicker and deeper. They've got to be much more robust. It's part of why building a house costs more in California, but we're an earthquake country, and the codes have changed. So if your home is an older home, you will not be using it. Second issue is that something called spalding goes on with concrete. Your retaining walls will often have a little bit of moisture in it, and during the fire will pop off little sections. If you see that, if you have retaining walls and you see that, you have a problem. The rebar inside of your concrete heats up. Tensile strength of your rebar will become potentially insufficient. There are companies that will come out and test your concrete. It's called a ping, and they will ping your concrete and see how dense it is, how strong it is, and they'll be able to determine if it can be used or not. The other thing is that in older foundations, the amount of rebar used and the size of the rebar was less than today's code. So even if you did get a really robust foundation and you found that it was thick enough in a waffle pattern, you're still going to find 2 or 3 sticks of rebar. It needs to be 4 sticks of rebar now. So be careful about outsmarting the system, thinking you can save your foundation to rebuild. We had a lot of that going on in our fire. And on almost all cases, the foundation will have to be pulled out, unfortunately. And that is a very difficult thing for the crews to remove. They will sit there and jackhammer it, sometimes for days. It is not easy. Sometimes that's on hillsides. We had cleanups that were 4 feet deep and 4 feet thick of rebar, of concrete with rebar. It is dirty concrete because it has rebar in it. It's difficult to recycle. It is a major challenge. So getting the ash and the toxic soil and what we call white goods, the refrigerators and things that survived, getting all of that and your burned cars removed. The car remove guy is separate, and they'll take care of your cars. That's all fairly easy, but those foundations are pretty difficult, unfortunately. And when they pull it out, you end up with a hole where your lot was. And then everyone's like, oh, you took all my topsoil, oh, look what you did. And it's not the case. They simply want to grade out when you're done so that you don't have a little pond where the mosquitoes breed. So the cleanup crews are there's an oversight, independent oversight company who is on site watching the cleanup crew. They get paid by the ton. So they could dig a lot of your dirt and get more money. But the oversight guy, he knows that, and they're there. He or she are there watching for that. So it's a just system. They have it worked out. But don't be surprised when you do find your house it's all cleaned out that you're missing a surprising amount. There's a lot of material missing.
So the FEMA will remove
FEMA will remove
everything. It's just going to be dirt.
the Army Corps will remove everything, and you will have a rectangle or square or triangle of dirt. That is what you will have. If you really believe they took too much stuff, and you have a little pond back there, you can protest to the contracting company, the administrative oversight contracting company, and they do have a program to bring in, it's called engineered material, that can fill in the hole and give you a level yard to start over with. But they are aware that mosquitoes and other things can breed there if you've got standing water, and they try. But it's shocking, especially homes that weren't on a pad, but they were built in the 80s, 90s. They still had a fair bit of concrete then. And so those leave big holes. Homes built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there's not that much concrete. It's not as much of a problem. But yeah, your lot will be scraped clean. They will go to the rear and work their way forward. They will pull out metal and set it separately. They will pull out what they call white goods, appliances and things, and set there. Those will go to a recycler. The metal will go to a metal recycling. There will be a recycling yard set up. There will be a concrete recycler over here. The soil will be pulled off the top, not a lot, a little bit. Then an independent testing company will come in. They will probe your soil, take samples to a lab, look for asbestos and all kinds of things. If it comes back clean, then the front of your yard will get wattles put in, and sometimes they'll spray on some grass as well to help with soil retention. Sometimes they'll put some straw over it, depends on the contour and everything. And then you will have a clean lot. And once you have that, then you can go forward.
Is that usually when people start the rebuilding process?
That's when they start. That's when they start the rebuilding process.
Is this the phase 2?
Phase 1, they're looking for the hazardous materials. The guy who was into mercury and stored it in the garage, the guy with all the ammo, the guy with a hand grenade, right? Those guys, they're looking for all that and more. And phase 2 will be it won't be FEMA at all. It will be the U.S. Army Corps who will hire some giant administrative companies, 2 or 3, who will hire a bunch of large fire debris cleanup contractors who will run heavy equipment and clean up one parcel at a time. They won't bulldoze a whole block and do them all together. They are one parcel at a time. And
that includes mature trees, everything.
Trees, we have 2 categories of trees. If it is called a danger tree, it's at the discretion of the cleanup contractor on site. And if it is a danger tree, meaning it can fall and it will be taken out. The correct way to deal with your trees is to leave the fallen trees on site. However, in some cases, they will take those trees off site. So don't be surprised if you have chunks of timber basically set aside on your property. Technically, that's how it's supposed to be done, but in a lot of cases, they'll pull it out and take it away. And that can include the root ball, the roots and everything down below, which is a whole another problem, is dealing with the root balls.
To move it back to the rebuilding, I'm sorry.
Absolutely, it's free form, it's just questions. Yeah.
I have a lot of clients in the Altadena area that are very concerned. I mean, Altadena was tons of cute little homes built in the 20s. And I have a lot of clients that are concerned that massive apartment buildings are going to go in, or just a ton of really ugly boxes and that kind of stuff. Did you see in that fire like a lot of, they were zoned single family, but multifamily, large multifamily were allowed to come in?
We did have some zone changes. We had mobile home park right off the 101, which was converted over into a denser housing zone. So it does happen. However, the vast majority were not rezoned. If it was a single family detached house, then that was what was rebuilt in that area. It is worth pointing out that, and you probably know that California has changed regarding granny units and even splitting lots. And these are areas to take a closer look at going forward. And I'm not the one to speak to regarding splitting lots, although we did build granny units. And that was just coming on when we were rebuilding 4 or 5 years ago. That was becoming mainstream, and we did do some of that. Yeah.
I have another cleanup related question. We have a pool at our house. We had a pool. How does the process? I haven't been able to find anything online about.
I know all about the pools. The pools will stay in place for the most part. The FEMA, the U.S. Army Corps program, for those who opt in, will usually leave the pool in place. The water in the pool is obviously toxic. The pool, you will have to deal with your insurance company to have it removed or to have it modified or to have it stabilized. Some people have them filled in. Some people will ask the same cleanup crew separately to chip out the pool, take it out. We did a couple of those. So you'll have to take a look. Most of the people, when the cleanup crews start to come to your house, they will contact you. I suggest you go out and meet them. For the most part, you'll be surprised. Most of them are pretty good people. There's some weird people from Louisiana, but it's all good, right? And the reason is that you want to communicate to them what you hope to see. If there's an area of landscape in the corner that you really like, your grandma planted those little palms over there, and you don't want the excavator to drive over it as he gets to the back, let them know. They'll tape it off. If there are some little steps that your kid made 20 years ago and over on the side, like, they'll rope it off. Oh, okay, yeah, well, don't touch the steps, you guys. If you don't, they're going to take all the steps. They're going to run over the shrubs potentially, et cetera, et cetera. If there is an old septic system or something else underground in part of your parcel, some of you more in the mountains might have that. We had septic systems. We had to tape off where the septic system is because of the weight of the heavy equipment coming through. We had people say, hey, the wedding ring, if you happen to find it, we had a safe. It's somewhere over there. We dug for it. It was in the foundation. If you can't find it, can you let us know? I found a lot of safes. Not one safe had anything that could be salvaged. The dollars were burned. The guns were melted. The passports had burned as well. We did have one woman talk about some gold, and we found the gold. Yeah. I called her up. I said, you got to come out. I gave it to her. Yeah, I gave her a big hug. It was something. It looked like, you could barely tell it was gold. It had like nasty stuff melted in with it. It had melted, but it turns out it was her grandma's brooch. Yeah. So talk to the crews in the beginning. If you have a chance, it's worth doing, and letting them know if there's personal things, just communicate, let them know.
Question about if there's a basement, is that in the same kind of category as foundation?
I had 2 homes burned down. One of them had a basement. That basement was a lot of concrete. A lot of it's still there. The basements will be treated completely as the rest of the house. All of the subterranean foundation, subflooring, all of that is contiguous with the house. It's all part of the same thing. The only exception will be some retaining wall areas. If it's thought the concrete's okay, and they don't want to risk a landslide or something falling down in the short to medium term, they may leave that in place. And that is a conversation that goes on between the contractor, the independent guys who are watching it, and sometimes they'll bring in someone from the administrative oversight company, ECC or Ashbridge or these others. They have guys who come out and monitor. They drive around, and you just have a talk. And hey, what do you think of this retaining wall? I think we ought to keep it. Let's keep this one, or let's just take the top 5 feet. Okay, let's do that. And it's kind of that way with the danger trees too. Like, these 2 right here, that one's burned really bad. It's leaning already in an angle, and you know what? We know that's going to go. Just do the guys a favor. Take it out now. Save them some hassle and money, and we'll go in and we'll knock the danger tree down. So it's a conversation, and it's ad hoc. that goes on site specific. But there are protocols in place for all these things. And basements, without question, will be treated like the rest of the stuff. And you're going to have an even bigger hole, unfortunately.
Yeah, so is it kind of like the scraping of the soil? Is it kind of blanket no matter what the property? Because like 3/4 of our property was like burned, torched, all the landscape, whatnot, but the front was fine. Like, do you think it's still, they're gonna go in and just wipe out everything?
It's hard to say. How big's your front yard?
Probably like 3,000 square feet or
Okay.
so.
Did the house across the street or either side burn?
Above us, across the street directly,
Oh.
and behind us, yeah, pretty much everything.
Okay, so they probably will look at the front.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're so exposed to so much going on right there. But that's also a little bit ad hoc. We had some properties that were over 5 acres. And the well house over there burned, an outbuilding where the guy worked on his cars burned, and his house burned. And we had to decide of this 5 acres which areas we had to scrape the ground and which we didn't. And in general, they try to keep it as small amount as possible. And that was an ad hoc conversation on these bigger properties especially. If it's a smaller area, a 5,000, 8,000 something square foot house in a neighborhood, that's pretty much the whole thing is going to get scraped. They'll often take an excavator with a large metal I-beam, maybe 10 feet wide, and they will very slowly pull it backwards. And they'll take top half an inch, maybe go down an inch, depending on what they find. They'll look at the dirt. Is it coming up clean? Is there fire debris stuff in there? And they'll take a little bit more. They don't want to go too far on their own. They'll be accused of taking soil. So it's a little tricky. And they'll do a testing, knowing or probably that it'll fail. And once the testing fails, then the contractor is told to go down again and take 2 more inches. Sometimes the rules will change. They're finding a lot of damage, so they'll say you can take 6 inches. Just depends on what they're finding in the area. And those types of rules will be fine-tuned a little bit as the process goes on. But in the heavily fire-burned area and in the footprint of the house, they will scrape the whole thing.
But aren't like water lines and do they get to, I guess they're deeper than?
So the utilities on your home, the older homes can come in on both sides. Newer homes, the last 30, 40, even 50 years, it'll come in on the right-hand side of the home. It'll be about 18 inches deep, and it'll be a common trench. And your water line will come in there, your electric line will come in there, et cetera. And those areas will be the first things that the cleanup crews look at. They will identify them with specific paint. They will mark a red paint, a yellow paint, a green paint, a blue paint, so that we know where those utilities come into the property, so that we can make sure we don't have a problem. The water lines will be capped. They will hand dig a hole. They will find where your water line is. They will put a cap on the end and get your utilities stabilized at the edge of your property before going forward with the cleanup. So there's a pretty elaborate, well understood process. They're not allowed to dig mechanically. They have to go through a golden shovel training. They do all these things. They have to wear the right stuff, and they do it by hand with a spotter. And it takes an hour or 2 or 3 to get that. So the utilities will be sealed and shut off and marked. Your curb will usually get a little spray paint on it as well, so that in future, everyone knows where the utility hookup trench is. And so that's actually the first thing that's done well, they look for the hazardous materials, then they get your utilities, then they go with the formal cleanup.
For a house like Chad's, what about the inside of the home? 'Cause toxic, like obviously their furniture and clothing, all that kind of stuff. What do those people do?
That's in many ways the trickiest part. I had a phone call from a woman who was at a talk I had a couple weeks ago, just the other day, and she's in this situation as well, and we talked at length about that. That, as I was saying earlier, there are degrees of damage, right? There is heat damage, sides, the paint's burnt, the trees are burnt, the plastic's melted, the utilities are affected, the water's affected. There is smoke damage, there can be an inch of silt on your sofa. The lady I was talking to before was describing that. She said as you walked in, it was a horrific smell. It was worse than being in a burned out area because there wasn't the air kind of cleaning it. It was extremely damaged from that. There are other people that are an eighth of a mile away, and the wind happened to be blowing pretty bad that way, and they left a couple windows open maybe as they left, and the house is pretty stinky, but you'll need new furniture, new drapes, and some new carpet, and a good cleanup, but it should go pretty quickly. So there are degrees of this, and it really kind of depends on the particular situation. In general, there are very good private cleanup companies that do this kind of work, right? Water lines burst, you know, the guys who clean up mold and water damage and et cetera. And you should be able to bring in one of these companies together with approval of your insurance company and have your area, your house cleaned up, in a private cleanup. And that should be able to be done much quicker than opting in on the FEMA program. And that probably is a better way to go in most cases. So if you're, the people like that are suffering because they don't have a place to live, right? They're just like the people that lost their home. They too have no access to their clothes and everything. Oh, speaking of clothes, I'm going to stop for a second. I wore this today. I got this 3 days after our house burned down. Horrible. Parking lot of the junior high school. Community come together. We didn't have any clothes. Kids got clothes, I got clothes. This is the first thing they gave me. I was like, yeah, it's October, it's freezing out. Something Mendocino or something. I got a shirt it was a beer company too. I still have it. So, yeah. Phew. I don't know why I get emotional. Well, because it's a really tough thing. I'll keep going. The scenario where you don't have a place to live, you've lost all your stuff, you don't have access to your toys, all the rest of it for your kids, et cetera, is a really tough one. You also aren't getting, let's call it the sympathy or the understanding or just the government jobs and procedures to support you as you go forward. It's a really difficult situation to be in. Unfortunately, you're going to have to just take the bull by the horns, get a private cleanup guy in there pretty quick, work with your insurance guys, and throw out a lot of the stuff that's in there.
Follow up. When we thought our house was gone, we got a text that was smoking, so we drove up, and when we saw it was still there, we were not out of the woods because there were like ember fires, and our garage was on fire, and our fence. We grabbed a lot of stuff from the house because we thought this might be our last chance. You know, we got an extra chance to grab more things, so we grabbed stuff like nostalgic stuff, artwork, and we put it into a storage unit, and then we grabbed clothes that we cleaned, dry cleaned or washed several times. I'm wondering if that's a bad idea in terms of, you know, the toxins.
In general, you got to, like I was saying earlier, you have to take the toxins really seriously. If you've got your clothes pretty quick, you wash them, you're probably going to be okay. Some of the stuff is more porous than others. I wouldn't use the furniture over and over. And I'll go on a tangent here. For those who lost their home, this might sound weird, but I found this over and over in talking to I cleaned up over 300 homes, right? So I met a lot of people who had their homes burned down. Over and over, after about 6 months, the greatest sense of loss was the mementos that you had. Your car obviously can be replaced, and guess what? Going forward, almost everything you have is new. So about a year or two from now, you will have a new car and new clothes and new shoes and new this and new that. And it's funny, you rebuild your life with these, but it's the mementos of that trip to France or the locket of hair of, from your kid or the pictures that you had, et cetera. The loss of those mementos is the loss of a little bit of who you are, and you will slowly forget who you are without these things. It's a very disturbing phenomenon, but one I've spoken with folks over and over about. These mementos are a bit of an anchor into who you are and your identity, and in the absence of these, that will take, in many ways, the greatest toll. Those things were important. Even though the books you had up there, you didn't really read them, but those were books you had in college, and it reminds you that you studied business or chemistry or whatever you did. The little bits like that, that's the hardest part, long term, once you get through all this stuff. For most people. Obviously, if there's a loss of life or other things, that's far worse. But for the majority of people, it's the lack of those little anchors of your identity that pop up. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sure there's more questions.
I don't know if you touched on it, but with properties with like shared fencing, is that something that the Army Corps gets rid of as well, or is there?
Fencing is a weird one, and the Army Corps is a little bit funny about that. Technically, the cleanup will focus on your home, and on the larger properties, we wouldn't go touch those back fencings because the Army Corps was like, no, we're here to clean up the loss of a residence, not the residents and their livestock pens or the residents and their whatever else, their little shop or things they had outside that were only partially damaged. In general, the contract crews on site will do you the favor, and they'll go and knock it down and everything. So again, if you get word that they're going to be there, go out and let them know, like, if you guys want to take this back fence over here, that'd be great too, and it is a little burned right here. They probably will. But in general, the Army Corps likes to stop at, it's not the exact footprint of your house, but they also realize that they can be manipulated to go off and do other things that aren't really part of the task at hand. And so there's a little give and take that goes on with that stuff. And if you talk to the crews, no one's really looking, yeah, they'll probably take part of that fence or the whole fence for you as well. Just let them know.
I don't know if there's a whole administrative side to this as well, which we haven't really talked about much, but there's obviously calling the insurance, also trying to get a break on your property taxes, trying to get a break on your mortgage payments. Can you talk a little bit about like ways to sort of soften the blow and
So you want to get so the questions, kind of soften the blow in terms of administrative side. On the financial side, you want to get your utilities suspended. Don't get them turned off, but get them suspended for now. You want to contact your bank if you haven't already. I think Newsom already said there's now a 1-year moratorium. So you want to make sure that there's a moratorium on your mortgage payments. There will be, this will evolve, and I'll give you an explanation. In our fire, we had a class action suit suing the utilities. We really should talk about this lawsuit a little bit too. Somebody asked a question about the lawsuit, because this is important stuff. Before we leave, it really is important, because you will not get a straight answer from anybody on this. The awards were taxable by the state of California, state of Arizona, et cetera, et cetera. Like, really? My house burned down. I'm getting paid for the sofa that I bought with money that was taxed already, and now I'm getting taxed on that? Well, to their credit, California said no. They had to take a special law to be passed, and they had to get everyone on board, but they said, you know what? Californians will not be taxed for the Paradise and Tubbs Fire awards. Unfortunately, people that left and moved to Arizona were taxed. Lots of little maneuvers about this whole little game. So the administrative side will continue to evolve. There will be declarations by the mayor, by county officials, by state officials, and even by federal officials potentially that will change things as it goes along. And for example, the 1-year moratorium that just showed up. I don't know if we have a TV on or something over there. So you've got your mortgage held off. You've got your utilities for now shut down, suspended. You've got a safe place to send all those forms that you're going to be filling out. You've got programs in place to replace things like driver's licenses and passports, et cetera. Vehicle registration issues as well. These types of things, it will evolve. It will change. There will be announcements. The DMV will say, oh no, actually we're hoping we're going to set up a whole thing on a weekend and you can come out for your car. Or Other agencies will do other things on an ad hoc kind of basis. The DMV may or may not do that, but it's an example of how this will sort of play out. You need to be aware of this. The best place to do that will probably be on your Facebook pages for your neighborhoods and your fire. There will be people who work every day and will go to the office and won't be able to double down on this. There will be people who make this the center of their life, and they will just focus on this, and they'll share on their Facebook pages, other social media, updated information as it evolves, as things go forward. And that's going to be the best place to find little tricks to the administrative side to navigating that area of it, because it will continue to evolve and usually improve as people hit roadblocks and people hit little areas. But sometimes it takes an act of the governor or other officials to get these things, and it'll be ongoing.
Realistically, when did you start seeing rebuilding happening?
3 years. They'll tell you it's 2. All the people that work hurricanes in Florida, they get it done in 2. It's 3 years. By the time all is said and done, the first families will be moved in 3 years. Yeah. Those tend to be people who have connections with construction companies and architects. And they're really focused on it and able to kind of go forward. And who have had a good settlement, had good insurance, or have other means to supplement it. The people who had to go through the lawsuit, like me, one of my 2 homes was not insured at all. That's going to take a lot longer, a lot longer. So you'll see vacant lots for years out there. And in some cases, it's people left, and opportunists bought those vacant lots, and they're holding on to them, hope to make. Other times, it's people like myself who don't have the means to rebuild and are going to need to rely on getting caught up and whole through a class action suit. So it kind of depends. The first ones will be in around 3 years. They'll be moving in. It's 7 years to the Tubbs fire, and you still have homes coming online and being finished up. Most of them are 3 to 4.5, 5 years. After 5 years, it'll start to feel like a neighborhood again, but it's going to be a very different neighborhood. And I got to say, the new neighborhoods are actually pretty nice. It's a new style, and they're fresh and they're shiny and everything else. The problem is you're in a new neighborhood and the roads are chewed up from all the heavy equipment for the reconstruction and the cleanup. The sidewalks are cracked, the curbs are cracked, et cetera. And eventually the city or county does come in and clean that stuff up as well. So it's 5 years, but you have no mature landscape. It looks like a tract home out in Banning or something, a new development type of thing. Albeit with some interesting and innovative architecture that kind of goes in. Hopefully in the Eaton fire, there will be an architectural review or oversight. These are historic areas, and that is a very important side of things. I've been told there's already a little bit of discussion about this, and hopefully that continues. I would put some pressure on your local elected officials so that you're able to maintain some of the character and individuality that goes on in those areas. My first home I ever bought was a 1916 Craftsman in Orange, California, and in a neighborhood that looks a lot like Pasadena or Altadena or some of these old California neighborhoods. And I know what it's like to live in one of those buildings. It's fantastic. You spend a lot of time in that area and understanding that history of the arts and crafts movement, et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully they are able to build back at least somewhat in that style.
Yeah, a little bit back-to-back question. So, talking about the lawsuits /
Yes.
Obviously, we assume Edison's probably at fault based on the photos and things that we're seeing. Do you have experience with like pushing for buried power lines? Is that worth it?
I worked on burying power lines.
Is that worth something that we should be advocating hard for in our neighborhood? And then follow-up question is just the lawsuit topic, class action versus mass tort we're hearing about, and just like how to that.
This is a really, really important area, believe it or not, the lawsuit. Your insurance will cover somewhere probably around $400 a square foot. Hopefully you get a bit more. Some, unfortunately, will get a bit less. Especially if you have older policies that haven't been updated, you may be looking at $200 a square foot. That's what some of our neighbors had. Our building costs up to 5 years ago in Santa Rosa were about $440 a square foot for a new custom home. It was nothing crazy fancy. Nice home, but nothing extravagant. There were large companies. There's one from San Diego that came in, built dozens and dozens of homes, only had 3 or 4 models, 5 models you could choose from, but they were able to get their building costs under $300 a square foot. And you'll have to choose how nice of a home you are able or want to go forward with. That will tie into what your insurance provides for you as well, and how much you can make up in the lawsuit. The lawsuit is to make up the difference between what you're awarded in your insurance and what it actually costs, right? So the lawsuits will have different categories. Most of you will only have 2 or 3 categories. There'll be the emotional loss. If you were there the day of the fire, they will have your cell phone information and they can quickly understand who you were. And if you have a picture or 2, you can make that case. That's not too bad. You'll be surprised how little you get for the emotional. It's pretty small. The second category will be the real goods, personal goods, personal property. And that is, of course, the clothes, the sofa, the things that you owned in your house. The third thing will be the real property. The real property will be insured somewhat, and this insurance policy gets you to a certain amount, but your costs are actually this, and that difference is what you'll be suing for in that third category. For most people, those would be the 3 categories that go with the lawsuit. I want to talk about the lawsuit. Are we okay talking about lawsuits for a couple minutes? Okay. So you're going to get overwhelmed by lawyers pressuring you to sign up for the lawsuit. They're probably already hitting you guys up. You'll hear it on the radio. They'll come up on social media. They'll be putting placards around, et cetera, et cetera. They'll have their own town hall meetings like this, and there'll be a lot more people there. And they'll give you nice, fluffy stories about why you should. Those guys are going to make a fortune. A fortune. They made over $1 billion in our fire. Well over $1 billion. They will take 1/3 of your award. Some categories, like the emotional, they'll take 25%, but the rest will be 1/3 or so. The lawsuits are almost certain to go forward. I too have seen the video. You probably all have, from the gas station. Look up the hill and you see the spark, right? And we saw a couple weeks ago there were utility crews up there studying that because there was rumors of this anyway. There's a homeless encampment a couple 100 feet, 300 feet away. And they may try to pin it on that, but I don't think so. It looks pretty clear that you had some sparks going on. It could be wires touching, could be a transformer going, et cetera. There are rules in place regarding depowerization of power lines during wind events. Apparently, the wind was 1 or 2 miles an hour less than the trigger point for mandating that in this fire. Good luck, lawyers, trying to argue that one. I don't think it's going to fly. So there probably will be a lawsuit. It will be a class action. There will be local lawyers who are saying, I'm one of you, I lost my home as well, and you'll want to go. We went with them. We found about 6 months, a year later, they then basically sold all of us to the bigger lawyer and simply get their little cut. I'm like, great. So now, instead of talking to this guy, now I got to call someone in Texas, and the info didn't transfer, and you think I'm Mike Gutierrez, I'm Mike K. And I've told you this 5 times. So it's a bit of a racket, to say the least. It's a huge racket. There's big dollars are going to be involved. There will be government agencies who want to recoup some of this money. The firefighter guys, the state of California, the federal guys, Army Corps, they'll all see a big pot of gold, and they'll all try to get in there and get their section of it. It'll be very frustrating to you guys as fire victims to watch that play out, but it will play out. In the end, it is going to take years. Ours took longer than usual. In our case, CAL FIRE determined our fire was started by a not up to code electrical connection at a guy's house on Tubbs Lane, hence the name of our fire, the Tubbs Fire. One guy hooking up, I think it was to his pump house. Well, okay, he doesn't have $13.5 billion, which is what we ended up with. For a year, everyone believed CAL FIRE, and we didn't think we had a lawsuit at all to stand on. It took a law firm to go in independently, research it, find some video, show the sparks coming out from a guy's home cameras, and get judges to overturn CAL FIRE. Like, how do you overturn CAL FIRE? But they did. And then the lawsuit was on. So that whole thing took a while. It was an emotional roller coaster. For a year or two, we're not getting a penny. We should restart somewhere and wherever. Oh, wait, no, we are. Oh, boy, this is great. The payout for it took a very long time. The emotional toll of trying to list everything that burned in our house and put that in as some of our supporting documents was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. I mean, it was just, because you have to sit there in your mind and go through every door in your kitchen and how many forks and, oh yeah, and I had a cheese slicer. Oh, I had that really cool thing that I got in Provence, that tea kettle. Oh God, it's brutal, brutal, brutal. If you have it in your head to start doing it now, I would recommend you get that behind you as quick as you can. They do have software they will eventually send you, and it kind of facilitates it. But while it's fresh, try to kind of work on that if you have it in you to do that. Some people it's cathartic, they want to do that, they feel good, they're doing something. Other people, it's too fresh, I can't do it right now. Up to you guys what you want to do. But for me, that was one of the toughest things. In the end, we were awarded initially 60 cents on the dollar. So let's say we were awarded $840,000, my wife and I, and my kids, for our personal loss, right? That's cars, motorcycles, sofas, things. We had a nice house, okay? We did okay. But we were ecstatic. Oh, that's great. But then the lawyer gets a third of that. But then we found out, no, there's not enough money, so you're only getting 70 cents of that, 70%, 70 cents on the dollar, minus the 1/3 that the lawyer gets. If you do the math, it's shocking. It's less than 40% of your award. So of the $840,000 we were all excited and all the rest about, we ended up with around $400,000. That's what we actually ended up getting, which did not pay for the stuff that we had in our house. So this lawsuit thing, I'm going to get to it, but I want to back up. You're going to get all these lawyers pressuring to sign. Do not sign anything. You have a year to a year and a half or more to sign up. And if you think the lawyers a year from now are no longer going to take you, oh, no. They'll take you until 10 minutes before, everything's submitted. They want to get everyone in here as best they can. Hold off and learn as you go forward. Little backdoor thing here. You can represent yourself. You don't even have to go in with these lawyers. And you're going to learn so much on your Facebook groups that the people that are with lawyers, you can actually lawyer yourself to a certain extent. Be really careful. I'm not advocating that you represent yourself. I'm not a lawyer. Probably should say something like, don't take legal advice from little old me. I do goat grazing these days. What do I know? Except that my lawyers got a heck of a lot of money. They were good in the end. I'm going to shout out to Michael Watts Guerrera, because they overturned CAL FIRE. And that's, I got to say, that's almost worth the 1/3 cut. Because without them, that particular group, so if you do see them show up, go direct from them and negotiate. That's the other thing. If you had a business, you rented out part of your house, or you did day school there, or something else, that's a business loan. You can negotiate this stuff with the lawyers as you go forward, and you should. But hold off, don't rush into these things, and you don't necessarily need to get the local guy, because the local guy is not going to represent you. Of course not. These are huge nationwide legal firms who deal with hurricanes and earthquakes and all kinds of things, and they ultimately are going to be the ones who are going to be arguing this stuff in court, and you have a lot of time before you go forward with that. But the good news is you probably do have a lawsuit coming. Those utility lines probably did strike it. You probably will be in good graces. I'll also say this. There is a large fund that was set up after the Tubbs Paradise fire that utility companies had the options to pay into, and your utility companies are part of this. That fund is in the neighborhood of $20 billion. It has been set aside. It has never been drawn down on. It's a relatively new government program. It was put in place by Newsom, to his great credit, after the Paradise Tubs fires. And that reservoir of money is out there. And that should be a cause of investigation, and I'm sure it already is by some of you guys, and it'll become part of your lexicon, your understanding, your consciousness of this. And in the future, that probably will be something that either you directly will go after in your lawsuit, or will be used to offset all of the costs and other things that other agencies are feeling right now, which will free up more money eventually when you guys go forward. So look for the large, I'm blanking on the name of it, it's basically the California Wildfire Utility Fund. That's not what it's called, but a quick search and you'll find it. So there is a new program out there. There's a big chunk of money, and most likely you guys will be, in one way or another, directly or indirectly drawing from some of that. I haven't seen anyone talk about that yet on any TV show, in any LA Times article. Nobody's talking about that yet, but they will. Yeah.
Could you speak a bit about dealing with insurance coverage? Do you have any tips on how not to get it?
After the fire, so one of our houses was not covered and the other had the FAIR program. FAIR paid out really quick and was surprising. I couldn't believe it. Another government agency did a pretty good job, got us about the right amount. Wasn't anything more, wasn't much less really, and I was pretty happy with it. Afterwards, after my crews did the cleanup and I'd learned how to manage construction crews with heavy equipment, I took them into rebuilding properties. And as part of a large team, I was working with insurance companies in the rebuild. So I actually do have a fair bit exposure on that side. Suffice to say, different insurance companies will treat this differently. It depends who you're with. Some are dealing with it a little better than others. There's a lot of political pressure in this area. I suspect the insurance companies are going to play a fair ball for the most part. Different people are in different scenarios. Some people need the money right away. Others can hold off a little bit and push and argue back and forth. And there will be a bit of that going on. Some will have policies that are up to date and in a good number, and some will have policies that they're far below. Your policies have different aspects to them, different sectors, and you really need to focus in on your landscape versus your cleanup versus your reconstruction versus the different, your out of pocket. You get a 1 year out of pocket for a lot of people going forward. So it's going to a little bit depend on your case by case, and it's going to depend a bit on who you're working with individually. So far, everything I've heard from these fires has been fairly positive. Does anyone have a particular case or something that they want to bring up about this? Run into any issues so far particular, specific?
So I'm dealing with it with my parents' house, and we're dealing with Allstate, and they have a certain number on the policy for rebuild cost, and it's not enough to rebuild. But the Allstate guy's like, we're going to give you this whole amount. Is there any world where we push back and say, yes, I understand the policy says you're willing to pay this amount out, but in reality it's going to cost, X amount more. We want to push back and not accept that.
There is, if you get an advocate who will work with you. The problem is they will also take a percentage. And so, okay, they get you an extra $100,000, but they cost $75,000 and it took an extra 6 months or whatever. So that's all part of the equation. However, yes, you should push back. Absolutely. If you're in a position where you can. If you're going to relocate to Texas next week and you're leaving anyway, you might just want to take the money and go, and that's okay. In the end, I left, right? I did leave. We still have the property, but we left. So, which we can get into that side of things at some other time. You do want to push back. They'll show you your categories. Oh yeah, you rebuild right here. But on the phone call, he's looking at a computer screen that breaks that down into other areas. And he's not including all of these. If you have an advocate, they can go look at the context involved in rebuilding or in landscape or in whatever aspect of the insurance that you have with them, the agreement. So I would consider an advocate. I don't know of any in LA. We had some that did a fairly good job. It wasn't great. It wasn't a lot more, but we did have some of that in our fire.
Because I asked the insurance guy, he's like, yeah, you're going to get everything that's on your policy. You're going to get the full amount. And I said, yeah, but that's not going to cover. What if we want to push back on that? He's like, you can't. This is the policy.
That is the policy, but there are little hidden subcategories within the policy. So yes, he's not lying, but yes, he knows there are little secondary level things that he can pull another 10 grand for this and another 20 grand for that. Yes, he can. It is in there. So that's where you need the advocate to come in. Is it a lot? Probably not. And these guys so far seem like they're working pretty good with people up here. So overall, it's probably, that number's fairly close to what you're going to get. If you feel like, no, my neighbor got this much per square foot, I'm way down, but your policy's here or similar, then yeah, you probably should. If your policy is pretty similar and they got this much and that's what you're being offered, that kind of tells you that's probably the going rate. That's about where you're at. Some people, again, will be at $200 a square foot and they'll be in real trouble to try to do the rebuild. Some people have no insurance at all. Some people are renters and they fled and they have lost everything. So different people are in different situations. And that's where the lawsuit comes in. If you're at $200, $300, $400 a square foot, it's $525 to rebuild. The lawsuit will be going after the difference, $125 to $150, $200 a square foot, but it will take a long time.
The people renting can go in on that lawsuit too.
Absolutely, renters, absolutely. We had, I believe it was 38,000 litigants in ours, but we only lost 5,000 homes. Structures were close to yours, but homes were a little bit less than yours. You know, structures include all kinds of outbuildings and pump houses and weird things. So it's an inflated number. I haven't seen the exact number of homes yet in yours, but there's actually our fire and your fire were actually pretty comparable. Both of your fires started in a kind of wilderness area, were wind driven and came into first neighborhoods and then urban cores. And that's exactly what happened with ours. Our 101 freeway actually melted. The 101 freeway, the asphalt melted and was not passable, 2 lanes in each direction in Santa Rosa. It skipped a 4-lane, 2 and 2 lane in the divider, and then hit the Coffee Park neighborhood on the other side. It was horrific. We had 11 schools damaged. We lost our grocery stores, 2 hospitals evacuated, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, most people will not be insured enough. And sorry for the dark news right now, but most people will not be there. If you have some extra money and you can afford to start the rebuild and you want to do that, okay, then you have the possibility of a lawsuit coming up where you may or may not, but strong potentially yes, get the difference. But then you lose a third to the lawyers and you don't get the 100% of your award. You'll get 60, 70, 80% of your award.
Does the amount of money you get from insurance affect a potential lawsuit payout, or they're completely?
No, they absolutely affect it. We had no insurance on one of the homes and got a 100% payback for the value of that home. And it was a 1.5 year negotiation. We won the award. They agreed, yes, your house burned down because of your utility company. And then it was a 1.5 year negotiation of how much that house was worth. And we had a long driveway. We had a bridge. In the end, we got 0 for the bridge. I think it should have been $1 million. It was a big bridge, big metal bridge. Didn't get a penny. But the driveway, it was a surprisingly big number. They sent helicopters over, taking pictures, and it was a long, drawn-out thing. But this was on a house with 0 insurance, and it was a 7-figure number that eventually did come in. So it was very significant. But it took a long time, and a lot of me going out and meeting with engineers, concrete engineers and structural engineers and demolition experts and arborists. I had a vineyard. We had viticulture, 2 viticulture guys come out and talk about the loss of the vineyard and the value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We had, I think, 36 different groups of experts come out and go through all this. It was exhausting. It was a very long, drawn-out process. But in the end, we did not have insurance on one of the structures, and it was 100%. We had a nice award, but we only got initially 60%, then they raised it to 66, and now they've capped us. It's right at 70% of the award amount. So let's say you were awarded $1 million. That means you got 600,000, then 660,000 total, then now it's 700,000 total. The amount of money was based on the utility company awarding 22 million shares additional into the stock market, diluting the value of the existing shares radically, which affected CalPERS, the teachers union, who were heavily invested in our utility. And there was a lot of political pressure that went with that. But that's where most of the money was generated through that process. And the shares would go from $9 to $10 to $11 to $12, and then they would sell, and then we'd have a bit more, but then it would go down. Our strike price, I think, was $9.06 a share. And so anything above $9.06 a share as sold was a little more money in the pool for us to divvy up. At times we thought we would get 80, 90, even 100% payback, but then in the end, we were able to claw our way up to about 70%. There might actually be a tiny bit more, a little 1-2% more we may end up getting later this year. That's the latest I've heard. So yeah, hold off on the lawyers, watch where it goes. You probably will have a lawsuit. It'll take several years. You probably will get a pretty good number. Push really hard in that process. Stay up to date with the Facebook. But understand that you probably won't get 100% of what you're awarded in the end. But that is a good thing. I haven't heard on the Palisades fire yet how that may or may not play out. But we do know that there was issues with water in a reservoir and some culpability on that side, and it wouldn't surprise me if something comes of that. Whether it ends up being determined or not remains to be seen. So we'll see. But the lawsuit side of things is an important one to fully understand. But unfortunately, it also extends this whole damn thing for yet another couple of years in your endless attempt to put this behind you. And that's a source of extreme frustration. Everyone has adrenaline and not excitement, but determination, I think, at this point, that slowly wears down. And even the toughest of characters, it wears them down. And the fact that this takes so long and that there are so many false promises and false starts that end up evaporating, and the frustration of that takes an enormous toll. A toll on marriages, a toll on your kids, and a toll on your individual mental health. And those are things to watch for, to watch each other, to be aware of, and to put into your calculation of how you go forward. I was on vacation 2 years after our fire with my kids in San Clemente at the beach, and I saw my kids laughing. I was like, whoa. I'm making really good money in fire cleanup and rebuilds up here, and I'm getting my life back together, but my kids are more important than anything. And just like that, I said, no, honey, we're moving to San Clemente. We're done. We're leaving that. Look at the kids. So your calculation is going to be far more than just financial, and it's going to be long-term, and everyone needs to be aware of that.
I have a question about home value. So Altadena was a neighborhood that was very much appreciating quickly. And a lot of businesses were coming in. There was a lot of upside in Altadena. In your case with Tubbs Fire, where did are home values back at what they were? No. Okay.
So I have a feeling our post-fire scenario will be different. I think Palisades and Altadena will get back to where they are now. I think there's LA as one of the great metropolises of the world will have enough pressure and enough numbers so that there will be the demand and they will get there. But I don't know. In our case, Santa Rosa is not as affluent, but it was the affluent neighborhoods and areas, the outlying areas, that for the most part burned. But with that went all kinds of different scenarios. The lawyers and doctors, it was their neighborhood that burned, and they left our town. And that didn't leave a lot of the upper class to come back into these neighborhoods, Fountain Grove and Marquess Springs, and you don't know these places, but if you've ever been to Calistoga and Napa and driven to Sonoma, you drove right through our fire scar, and I lived on that road. So those country areas have not retained their value, and they are selling today, even though they have rebuilt homes, for less. But I don't think that that type of scenario is going to play out with you guys. The big issue where we are is fire insurance. You can't get fire insurance in these areas that burned in Santa Rosa, in many of these areas. But I think you guys will be able to get fire insurance, or perhaps the FAIR program will be expanded and moderated so that it's more accessible and more mainstream, and that may be the Band-Aid that you guys get. Also, neither, especially your neighborhood, these were 100-year-old homes. That means it hadn't burned in 100 years, right? That means it's not really an area that typically burns over and over. If you go on the CAL FIRE site, you can see historical burn scars throughout the entire state of California. And you can overlay and see fires burn in the same area more or less over and over, every 10, 30, 40, 50 years. In my lifetime, areas of Malibu have burned, I believe it's 9 times, right? So our fire, the Tubbs fire, was something like 90+% exactly a fire scar in 1964. And in the fire academy, when I was there, they told about the big one back in the day, right? When I was 1 year old. So in holy Toledo, the Tubbs fire burned almost the exact same fire scar. Well, as a result, insurance companies are not like, dude, this burns once, twice a generation. But your area doesn't, so you might be okay. CAL FIRE has also put together maps of rating fire zones in the state of California. If your area of Pacific Palisades is under the very high fire zone, you are going to have problems with insurance. Part of my town now in San Clemente, where I was this morning talking with the goats and fire cleanup stuff, is in the very high fire zone. And I was talking this morning with a guy who fought the fire there in 1976. He's like, yeah, I was right here in this canyon fighting it. I was like, yeah, I've looked at the fire scars. It's burned 3 times in my lifetime. So that part of San Clemente is probably going to burn again. It's right against Camp Pendleton. There's live fire. You know, it's a lot like Palisades. So parts of Palisades where it came all the way down probably haven't burned before. Probably fire values will be maintained or go up. But up in the hills, it may be a bit more of a question. But overall, I think your guys' property. Now, what we found was a lot of lots went for sale right away. As soon as they were cleaned up, they went on the market. There were hundreds of properties suddenly for sale. There were realtors who were out there. There were people from out of town, out of country, coming in thinking this is a good investment, and then realizing maybe it wasn't such a good investment. And in the end, it wasn't. At the same time, we had a phenomenon where people were excited to stay. They want to rebuild the community. After the 4th, 5th year of this, okay, they had a house, but they're exhausted. And eventually, they're done. What happens when so many people get burned out? Even the cafes, the wine bar, my favorite wine bar in Santa Rosa, burned. The little place, my Trader Joe's, burned. All of the things that I used to go to and use were now gone. But the ones that didn't burn, they just lost 20 or 30% of their clientele, and they'll hold on for 6 months or a year, but they will also go under business. By the 3rd or 4th year of this, none of the places that you liked are even there anymore. So, okay, you're tough and you're resilient and you rebuilt your home and now it's there and everything, but that restaurant isn't there, and the cafes aren't there, the wine bar's not there, none of that stuff that really made it, and by that point, you may leave. The point is, these homes come up for sale. So in Santa Rosa today, we have older homes for sale, we have rebuilt homes for sale, and we have vacant lots for sale. The vacant lot properties are stuck at a price. They're not going up. If anything, they've gone down. The rebuilt homes are selling for at or even below rebuild cost. So that's the phenomenon we're seeing up there. In Paradise, it's even a worse scenario. But for you guys, fingers crossed, you know, focusing in, I think you'll be back where you're at. And you know what? In 5 years, 6 years, when you have a whole new neighborhood and it's kind of cool, if they do it right, it might even be desirable. And the Coffee Park neighborhood of Santa Rosa is now rebuilt, and it's actually more desirable than potentially, possibly than it was before. So in that case, yes. Overall for us, not so much. Yeah.
Just a quick question about insurance companies and kind of have you heard any best companies that were helpful in the payout or quicker at that or?
State Farm was really good. The majority of the work I did was with them. We worked on a $46 million claim. At that time, it was the largest single claim for State Farm. And I have nothing but positive things to say working with them. Mercury has been pretty good. I haven't used AAA, but I've heard plenty of good things from AAA as well. And shockingly, FAIR, the California state program, was actually much better than I thought. Again, what I saw was that it came down to individuals, your adjuster, and how they were responding. Some were emotional and involved themselves, and were not on your side, but we're working with people. Others weren't, and they were from far away, and I don't think they were emotionally involved at all. And I think they were cold-hearted and saw it as a numbers game. So I've seen it kind of all over the place. But State Farm, Mercury, FAIR, and potentially AAA would be the ones that I'd throw out. I'm sure there's others as well. Yeah, that's some thoughts.
Can I ask, I know you talked a little bit about the swimming pool thing. So, but did the government clean up, they don't drain the pools, or they do?
They do. Initially they did not. That became a subject, and then they started demanding that we drain the pools. And then we started with the issue of where do you put the water. So then we started using the water to wet down the areas so that we would keep the dust down. And I actually had guys who would go into swimming pools. We had a metal trash can. We drilled a bunch of holes in it, put a water pump in the middle of it, hooked it up to a fire hose, ran a pump up above, sucked the water up about 6-7 feet, and then we had fire hoses spraying the pool water into the general area. And it wasn't toxic enough so that it was concentrating in a problem, and it was kind of solving a couple of issues at the same time. Because where do you take all of that much water? Especially up there, we were cleaning up during the winter. You guys are going to be cleaning up in the spring, summer, so you're going to be in a better position that way, although you'll have more dust. So yeah, the pools will be drained, and that will be part of the project if you opt in.
And then, were they usable again, or were they all?
Most of the pools were, and I was talking about the owners coming out to talk to the crews. I had owners coming out and telling me, please save the pool, save the pool. And I was like, okay, we'll save the pool, you know. Others were like, no, I hated this pool, never liked it. Go ahead and try to damage it, because then I can tell the insurance, you know. I was like, I'll see what I could do, buddy. So that stuff does go on. Go and talk to them. And if you love your pool and you put the coping yourself and you chiseled those rocks and got them right and it's your pride and joy, let them know. But for the most part, they will be saving the pools, but they will be draining it. Now, there's a problem when you drain a pool. When you drain a pool, it rises, and it can become a problem. So I'm not saying you need to go put 1/3 water back in it after you're all done, because, you know, that's against the rules. But if you do that, your pool will sit deep enough so that it doesn't ruin itself over the next year or two while you're waiting to rebuild. 1/3. There's a lot of games that go. You're starting to realize there's a lot of games that go on with this whole thing.
Two-part question, I guess. Do you have any resources or anything that people should know if they work from home primarily, or people who owned a business? Like, one tier is a person who works from home for another business. The other would be a person who runs their actual business out of their garage. Anything that they should be aware of in terms of lawsuits or?
Lots of stuff. So our properties up there, 26 acres, were 5 different parcels kind of pieced together with a vineyard. The vineyard was an LLC. It was growing wine grapes. That was a business. That is a separate category in the lawsuit. You want to document your businesses as well as you can. If you're a babysitter, that's pretty tough to do. Get some, whatever you can, some names, some people that'll talk about it, some photos, anything that you can to document you're working at home. In our area, this was before cannabis became legal. there were people growing a lot of cannabis in our area. It's Sonoma County, right? So it was quasi-legal at that time. It's not illegal, but it's not the system we have now. So they had a lot of cash. They were outside of the banking system. The cash, tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars, were in their safes. That's how that business ran at that time. That all burned. That all burned. Very tricky situation. They were legit, they were licensed, they were legal. These are older guys and ladies who were hippies maybe back in the day, and they're living on, you know, their best life with their chickens out there, and they're growing little cannabis in the back, and it is gone. So a business, example of a business that was going on, hard to document all of it. And that was a significant struggle in our area, and that was not my business, but I did know people like that. And when you live in Sonoma and you go to a soccer game, the other dads, one or two of them are in that business, and you'll chit-chat. That's how I know this. And the guys I talked to are like, dude, they all lost all of it. So some businesses are going to be completely, are going to be very difficult to really support a claim. In the end, there is a category for business loss. Our Hilton Hotel burned down. Like, the big businesses lost. Unfortunately, in our case, they were only awarded around 10%, 10 cents on the dollar. So although you may have a work from home scenario and you may be able to document it fairly well, it may or may not, unfortunately, be something you even want to pursue, because at least in our scenario, the payout was so small. You got 10%. That was the award, was 10%. The lawyers get a third of that. We only got to 70% of the award. So a very small number by the time it comes to your pocket. That may change in this case. I was talking earlier about how things change. The governor may realize this. He may come in and say, no, that needs to be awarded. We need to be looser with how you document things. We need more accepting. But that is an area, business loss, especially work-at-home business loss in our fire, that was not adequately addressed or covered at all. Our working vineyard out there that I'd spent all this time and effort and everything else to get it, we didn't get a penny in the end for it at all.
Do the lawyers pursue you as a business owner?
They will, but a businesses is one of their least interesting areas to go after for these reasons. Homes, everyone's sympathetic, you lost it, or your smoke damaged severely. People are understand that. It's part of the system. The lawyers will gobble all that up. They'll get 300, 400, 800, 1,000 of these guys, and then sort of hand it off to the bigger ones, and then they'll get a cut, and the bigger guys get their cuts, and they'll go with it. Business loss, yeah, if you're the Hilton Hotel, okay, different story. But if you are a graphic designer or a content creator who is working out at the home and you're freelancing, that's a tough situation.
The example I'm aware of is a woman who ran a clothing business out of her home. So all the inventory was in her garage. That's lost. And it's, you know.
If she's got pictures and some documentation, and if she's paid taxes on it, she probably will. If she's and if he or someone else in a different situation isn't able to document it so well, didn't pay taxes on it, etc., they're going to be in a world of pain. People sublet properties out informally. You grant a unit, maybe it's informal, maybe it's just cash, maybe they PayPal you $500 a month or something. That if you don't have the taxes, that's the first thing that I ask is where your tax receipt for it. And if you're not able to really document it, it's going to get pushed aside pretty quick. And even in a best case scenario, like I said, the payout, at least before, was a really small amount, unfortunately.
Do you have any advice? So, you know, we're not in the total loss, but we lost all of our other structures. You know, our detached garage was filled with our stuff. And, you know, it feels like it's going to be different navigating insurance company, obviously, between that and total loss. Do you have any tips for, like, partial loss? And
first, you and everyone, keep receipts of your next 12 months, where you're living. And everything goes, and that includes food, extra commute. I mean, anything you can come up with. If you buy a trailer and go live in your trailer on your property, keep your receipts of all of that. If you rent a house somewhere else, keep your receipts and everything. The house needs to be similar to the house that you have. If you go rent a mansion, but you lived in smaller homes, but but it should be like for like. So if you lived in a $1.5 million house, you're expected to go rent a $1.5 million house. And that will be offset as whether it's a full loss or a partial loss like you have. The other aspects of a partial loss, but it really applies for everybody. Receipts for furniture and replacement stuff should all be done. And some of that you'll buy before your house is rebuilt. We ended up with an RV on our property for a while. An adjacent parcel was not red flagged, and we were able to put it up there. So we kept this stuff. We bought a washing machine and dryer and different things, and we hooked it all up. So we kept the receipts for that stuff. And absolutely, those are things that you should be compensated as well. If you've lost your home, that's an easy one. But if it's only smoke damage, no, only. If you're in that situation, if it's a smoke damaged home, you want to keep that stuff, and you're going to get compensated for more than just the cleaning up of your house. You are also entitled to the same type of compensation for personal loss. Some of that stuff in your home will be personal stuff of loss. You're not going to reuse that sofa. You're not going to reuse that. All of that stuff, you'll be compensated as well on top of the cleanup. So let's say the cleanup is $150,000, then you have another $20,000, $30,000 of your stuff. And you're entitled to replacement cost, not cost of your sofa. So keep that in mind as well. If you claim a $10,000 sofa, but you had a little thing from IKEA in your college days, yeah, you'll have some trouble because they will ask for photos and documentation of what you have now, and it's fairly like for like. But as long as you go forward with that and you document that, you will be entitled to that stuff as well. And these are the areas where you will have to push back or remind your insurance guys along the way. And the same with a vehicle. And clothes and all kinds of stuff. You will end up finding that you lost a lot more stuff in your home than you think you did now. A lot more. And in the cleanup process, there will be damage. There will be loss as well. Some of it accidental. Crews will throw away stuff that they weren't supposed to. They didn't realize stuff will get damaged just in that process. And even in the move, even in storing stuff that you keep, all of that stuff will be compensated. Yeah.
I have kind of a question looking into the future because we bought our first house and have a high mortgage and kind of have to go back just to wait until the value's back up, and also we love the community and want to stay there and want to be part of the rebuild and all that. And I have a two-part question. One is a little bit about the trauma of what happened. I'm curious if you've spoken to your neighbors and friends who ended up staying. I'm thinking like 5 years from now, our neighbors are back and, our house is clean, we're living up there, and there's a red flood warning and Sena in our winds, and, I have a hard time imagining, like, how we'll sleep at night, just, like, knowing that it could happen, it happened once. And the other question is more, like, practical, like, what can we do, how can we be prepared for a scenario like this? How can we fire harden our house? We're putting out the fire in our garage using the pool water from our neighbors' houses because there was no water. Just thinking like how can we navigate the future in what might be our only house.
I think we should get Brad to host another one of these things in a few months because there will be things like this that come up. Fire hardening is a great one for you who maintained your house and you're going to go back in, and I can give an entire discussion like this just on fire hardening. It's an important thing. I saw firsthand what works and doesn't. As a firefighter, I was trained in what works. As a builder, I was current on the codes that do and don't work. And this morning with my goat grazing and weed abatement guys, we were talking about using pumps in swimming pools and what they are. Folks that want to go, thank you for coming out. I'm sorry that we met under these circumstances. If you want to get Brad's phone number from me, I have several people from LA that I don't even know who call. Feel free to do that. Text as specific questions come up. And I hope things go well. Anybody else want to step out? Okay. On the issue of fire hardening, yes, there's an entire amount of technology that goes with all that. And I will keep it short. You want 200 feet of defensible space. You want 1/8 or smaller screens on all entrances to your eaves to everywhere in your house. You don't want any clutter underneath any steps or porches that you have in or outside of the house. And the stuff like eucalyptus or cypress or things that burn quickly, you want those simply removed altogether, no matter where you are. But in the end, we saw what a firestorm does once it gets going. There is no technology. They think nuclear bombs might be able to put that stuff out. It's probably not very practical. But yeah, once a firestorm goes, you can only prevent these things. You can't stop them. But we did see fire-hardened houses that did survive. Unfortunately, I also cleaned up fire-hardened houses that did not survive. But there is stuff that needs to be done. And California really should change the codes and tighten this stuff up. On the second part of your question, the emotional side, you saw me get choked up earlier. It never goes away. I mean, everyone I've talked to, they are, and it's not the loss of the house. That you can get past. It's the loss of the mementos, and it's this years-long fight that goes on, and what that does to you as a person. That stays with you going forward. I'm 7 years in now. Like I said earlier, I just got one of my last payout checks. I mean, that's how long this whole damn thing's been going on and on and on and on and on. You will have PTSD. You all have PTSD right now. You all need to see a therapist. I saw a therapist. My daughter saw a therapist. These are important things. When I went into the therapist down in Orange County, it turns out she had also fled the exact same fire. I was like, whoa, you too, huh? You will see a community of fire survivors. You will be able to relate with them just like I can with you. Everything I'm saying, you will learn and more in the coming years. You will be an expert at all this stuff. You will know more current than I am, because your fire's fresher, unfortunately. It becomes part of who you are. In the end, we saw generations go through world wars. We see it in parts of the world now. We've seen hurricane survivors, etc. This is part of the human condition, maybe more than we have realized as a society. We've gotten a pretty easy go of it the last, 100 years, whatever you want to call it. This is probably closer to what most humans in history have gone through it once or twice in their life. It's a tough thing. It's the toughest of times. It also brings out the best in people, and that's something I saw strongly in our fire, and I'm sure you will as well going forward. But yeah, the sirens still freak me out. Sense of smell, PTSD. We had the red flag warnings down in San Clemente at 3 a.m. I got in my Jeep, drove to the highest part in our city, and I just sat there. Any smoke, any flames, because I can't sleep, I can't relax. I didn't see anyone. I saw a coyote, but there was no forward deployed, nothing against Orange County Fire Authority, but there weren't the resources out there. So yeah, it never really fully goes away, I think. My kids, because I decided to leave, I actually think, they're pretty resilient. They're late teens now, one's in college, one's a senior, and I know that it affected them. I know they're slightly different people, but they also were able to go forward, in a large part because we moved out of the area. And that was hard. They had to meet new friends, all that kind of stuff. In the end, I think that was a positive move for us. This is an area that maybe some other time we'll talk about, making these choices, these hard choices. But yeah, your area won't burn again. I don't think you need to worry about that. It's unusual. It's these fire scar areas like Malibu and other areas that burn over and over and over, that folks really do need to worry about that. And maybe we shouldn't build houses in some of those areas, unfortunately. But yeah, it's very traumatic. For about a third of the people, they will move on. They will leave. They will go. And if you're older, why would you spend 5 of your next 10, 15 years of your life, 20 years of your life dealing with this crap, exposing yourself to the toxins, the headache, the depression, and the lowered quality of life? It doesn't make any sense. Go to Arizona or go to Florida or go to Central California, go to, I don't know, wherever, and get away from it. Because as soon as you leave, it really starts to go away quick. It's a funny thing. But if you stay and you fight, you will end up with a new neighborhood. You will have a very strong community because you all helped each other get through all this stuff. We found in our fire that in the end, the fire victims were awarded well. They came out with pretty nice homes and a new car. And in the end, I don't think people realize how hard they had to fight to get that, but at least for the most part, they did get that. They didn't end up, they lived in trailers for 2 or 3 years, like we did for 7 months. But in the end, they did get whole. It just took a really hard fight for a really long time. And in the end, I'm not sure if it was worth it for all of them. But certainly some of them feel really good about it, though. And others felt like they needed to move on. But some people moved to Arizona, and then they got taxed on the money that they got, and it didn't work out so well. Anyway, I don't mean to go down a rabbit hole or whatever, but it's obviously it's an emotional thing for me to even sit up here and talk about it. Right? It doesn't go away.
We should give you a break.
Yeah, I know. I'm all pumped up. Well, I don't drink a lot of coffee, and I'm on my second cup right now, so I'm like, blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
You were amazing, Mike.
No, you guys are amazing. No. No.